At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability, ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to another live stream edition of the John Conley Report. Remember, go ahead and subscribe to the show wherever you can. If you're watching on YouTube, whether now or later, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can always read my work on ESPN.com. Always appreciate you going there. I have a training camp update every single day. So do my colleagues for ESPN do as well. So if you want to learn about what's going on here or anywhere else in the NFL, go to ESPN.com. So today, another practice report, and then I'm going to answer your questions, whatever you have. If you want to ask me about Brandon Ayuk, go ahead. I don't think anything's going on here with that at all. So let's jump into the practice report that I have for Tuesday. Pretty hot one, folks. But the big news came before practice when, as expected, Washington coach Dan Quinn said that Jayden Daniels would start the preseason opener against the New York Jets. Now, they also released the depth chart today, and at 9 o'clock, we were going to find out that he was the starter because he would have been listed as #1. Now, when we talked to Quinn, we didn't know that as yet, but Quinn did say he was #1 in the depth chart. He's going to start against the Jets. We don't know how much he's going to play in that preseason opener. He's going to practice more against the Jets on Thursday than he will play in that game. So it's going to be a really important practice for him. Then he will play, I'm going to guess, a couple series. I don't know how much yet. So that's what I know for now. So again, not a surprise. Based on practice, this is the only way you could go. And also based on logic. Like, we know he's going to be the starter eventually. It's just a matter of them being comfortable with each step of the way, where he's at, and just how he's developing. And they've been very comfortable enough to, over the last several practices, he's been the first guy going out in the 11-on-11 work with the first group. So that obviously matters. And then against, to be honest, you don't want to put him back there behind the second or third offensive line in his first preseason game if he has earned what he has earned. And one thing Quinn said, he has earned this. And I think, it's funny. I think some people get a little bit caught up in whether or not he's been named or not the starter. What matters is what we're seeing on the field. They're giving him all these reps. Whether they officially say this or not is kind of irrelevant because it doesn't change what they're doing. He's been earning more and more reps. I think it's been good for the other players to see this. And if you're going to preach competition, then you got to follow through with that. But again, it's not like he's been missing out on a lot of reps. Like, he's getting all those reps with the starters. I think they do a good job of doing that. And there are a lot of ways to build the chemistry. I think the #1 thing that he does to build chemistry with his receivers is communication. That's how you do it. Like, you can take all these reps, but if you're not getting on the quote unquote same page, I think I've used that phrase 100 times this week, but if you're not getting on the same page, then through communication, it's going to be difficult. And one thing that Terry McLaurin told me, and I'm going to have a story on this later, talking to Terry and about maybe finally having a guy you can build with. But he said that when he was talking to him, he was asking, he said Jayden was telling him where he's going to put the ball on a certain pass. And he said he's been putting it right there on this back shoulder, whatever it is. He's been putting right there. So that's how you start to get on that page. And, that he said there have been times where a little signal, he'll give him a little signal based on the leverage, and that will tell him things. Like, all that stuff is how you start to build it. It's not just about he's doing this. It's the communication, and you can do that. And they cycle through so many receivers. It's not like when he wasn't working with the first team, it's not like he wasn't getting reps with those guys. So anyway, we all know where this is headed. He's shown no reason to think that it's going to go any other way. So that's what we know for now. And one of the things that Cliff Kingsbury said about Daniels that he is really liked, and again, I keep stressing the behind the scenes stuff because I think that's been the most important stuff. Let's get to the Cliff Kingsbury quote. He said, "He must study it like crazy at night because every morning when we get here, he walks through with us, he nails it. And so you just appreciate the work he's putting in. He's paying the cost to try and get where he wants to get, and that's all you can ask from a young player." So that's exactly what he has been doing. And so I think like that bodes well for them. And I think it bodes well for him. So anyways, that's one thing we know there. Today, there was a lot going on out there. And if you're wondering why I'm doing this from home instead of out at the facility, it's because it was 2 million degrees out there and give or take 1 million. But also we had a chance. I wanted to come home, take a shower. Kind of felt like you feel kind of bad when you're in that sweat and you're kind of drying in your own sweat. So that's one of the things that I want to do. So anyways, I want to do it here, and I think it's better reception and the computer's not going to overheat and all that. But there was a lot going on out there today, in fact, including like Joe Gibbs was there. Darrell Green was there. And let's see who else. Melba, if you remember Melba, she's a longtime fan, she's 100 years old. I mean, every year she's been out here for about 6 or 7 years now. She's coming out to practice. She was doing that in Richmond. She's doing it now. Joe Gibbs went over to her, talked to her for a few minutes after, right kind of late in practice. It was pretty hot out there. And so they wheeled her out there. He was talking to her. That's what Gibbs does best. By the way, Gibbs looks really good. Seems like he's really doing really well. Always good to see him. I was fortunate enough to cover him the second go round and always enjoy seeing him as well. So anyway, that was it. Darrell Green was out there as well. And this was also the last day for fans. The team was practiced in shells. Now the original schedule had them in pads. Part of the change, I think, was because they're playing the Jets. It's going to be a high intensity practice on Thursday, and then you got the game. But I also think let's take some logic here. You look at the offensive line. I'm going to get into some depth chart stuff in a minute, but you look at the offensive line today, not out there today. Brandon Coleman, Andrew Wiley, and who was the other one? Sam Cosmi. That's a big one. Cosmi's been sick. Wiley told me the other day that he felt like he'd be out there for the Jets. Whether it's a game or the practice, we'll see. And then Coleman, I'm not exactly sure what he's dealing with. That was something that we didn't know when you go out practice. We do not get injury updates after practice. So I think like when you watch it, in fact, at one point out on the field for the first line with Jayden Daniels, it was Lucas, then Allegretti and Biadasz starters, and then Michael Dieter at right guard and Trenton Scott at right tackle. That's not an ideal lineup for what you want to put out there. So I also think that's partly why they probably went with the shells for sure. Just it makes sense, right? And so anyway, that was one thing to note. Also, by the way, a little shout out to Blaine Bowling. I know he was there. I tried to hook up with him. He's a gold member, valued member, and always ask good questions when we do those private streams. Next time we'll hook up Blaine. Let's get to the depth chart stuff. So today, the other parts of the depth chart, because it's not just Jayden Daniels that we got to talk about, right? So if you want to see it, I put it up on Twitter, on X, however you want to refer to it. But a couple of the notable ones is that Brandon Coleman is listed as a starter at left tackle, the number one left tackle. He will start in the game Saturday again. So assuming whatever he was dealing with, we'll see on Thursday if he's out there, et cetera. But that's the plan right now. And I think he's earned that too. I think he's looked pretty good. Now, how is he going to look when he goes up against another defensive line? We'll find out. But I think it's the same thing with Daniels, where you pass the tests that are in front of you. That's all you can do right now. Like, you're doing some pop quizzes, you're doing some tests. The season becomes the final, right? We're not even at the midterms yet, because the midterms would get to the games, get to these joint practices, but you're passing these early tests. And so that's why he's now at left tackle, has earned that position for sure. He's worked some at right tackle as well. But So anyways, the other one is Mike Samerstill, listed as one of the starting cornerbacks. They had 3 listed starting cornerbacks. It was St. Juste, Samerstill, and Mike Davis. Now, first of all, let me stress that these are unofficial depth charts. And I think it's not like they put a lot of thought into it. The public relations staff does a lot of the work with these to see like, okay, based on practice, who's working where and who's going in there now and whatever. That's how a lot of this goes. Clearly with quarterbacks in some of those spots, the coaches are going to say, well, this is the guy, right? And this is who you're going to start, et cetera. So at cornerback, what I know when I'm watching is that the first three corners out there have typically been Forbes, St-Juste, and Samerstill. So that one, but I think the whole thing is it remains a competition. So Davis, Forbes, and St-Juste, more of a competition. Samerstill, they've worked a little bit outside. He's really good in the slot. That's where he's expected to play. So the fact that he's starting, and I'll get to something that Joe Witt talked about with him in a minute. Actually, I'll say it now because like with Samerstill, one of the things he said, he doesn't act like a rookie, that he loves how the questions he asks in meetings, and he loves the maturity and his presence. Really good in the room. So that's what he's adding in addition to being what looks like a guy who can help them from the corner, or at slot corner. For the entire month of August, the Adventure Park at Sandy Spring is offering multiple ways to save on climbing and zip lining and 50% off axe throwing. There are only a few Sundays left without football, so it's time to get that last summer adventure on the schedule. There's no better place to spend the last few days and nights of the summer with friends and family. Don't just take our word for it. The Adventure Park at Sandy Spring was named the #1 aerial adventure park in North America by USA Today. Anytime you're thinking about reaching new heights, make sure you know before you go. The Adventure Park at Sandy Spring is the only ACCT accredited park in Maryland or Virginia. So there you have it, folks. For the rest of the summer, you can get the best climbing, zip lining, and axe throwing in the country, up to 50% off right here in the DMV. Reserve your adventure today at www.theadventurepark.com/kind. Jamin Davis listed as an outside linebacker behind Dante Fowler, who's also obviously listed as an outside linebacker. They worked a lot at edge. Davis continues to work more at the edge. He's working from a 2-point stance, sometimes from a 3 or a 4-point stance at defensive end. One thing that Witt talked about today is he likes how Davis is starting to play against the run from that position. So again, work in progress with him. Going to take a few minutes to get him going. First kick returner, Noah Benegeni, and then Kaz Allen. So, and that's kind of, Noah had a good return. I think I mentioned this here the other day, had a nice return in practice the other day, and Kaz Allen has shown some things too. I saw today they did some one-on-ones, and because there was so much other stuff going on, I didn't get a chance to see a lot of it. But one of the ones I saw was Kaz Allen putting a nice little move on someone and getting open, using that quickness. That's what he has, which can make him an effective returner. He's got ball security is going to be a big issue with him. And do they think he can help them from scrimmage if they needed it? Because if you're going to keep him active and there's an injury, you need to make sure he can help you from scrimmage as well, because you do have other options at kick returner. Samerstill, I think Austin Eckler, if they wanted to put him back there, would be really good back there as well. So, they do have some options, but Kaz Allen will get a good shot because he does have that quickness that can help for sure. And then the first punt returner, Jamison Crowder, Jahan Dotson was listed after him. We've seen Dotson field punts before and really not get a whole lot, right? I mean, they never really used him. So Joe Witt and Cliff Kingsbury met with the media today. One of the things he talked about is that, there's a lot of talk about how you want to play, what you want to be as a defense, et cetera. He said, but the one thing he said, which, I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but it's also very true. It's not about words. It's about what you do on Sundays. And I think we've all heard a lot of words here over the years, haven't seen it on Sundays. So he clearly gets that. Let's see. He talked about Bobby Wagner. I think this was because one of the things that I'm interested in is what do these guys like? We know as you get older, there are things you can no longer do. You're not going to run quite as fast. You're not going to jump quite as high, whatever. But what can you do as you get older? Because as you get older, you gain a lot of wisdom and experience. How does that help you? And not only for Wagner, not only does it help him, it helps those around him, because the more information he processes, the more he can relate to others, because he's seen just about everything. So that's one of the things that really helps. He's still a very good tackler. But the one thing, it's funny, because one of the things that Witt said that has surprised him about Wagner is what he sees in practice. And like, they have these ball pursuit drills, and he's routinely the first guy there, or the first linebacker there, or one of the first guys there. And he said he even told Wagner, you don't have to run like that every time. Like, they understand, like, you know what you're doing, et cetera. Wagner just does it. And I think that's where you want to say, like, how does a guy become a future Hall of Famer? It's that. And I think that's why people really like that guy, teammates, coaches. And when you have a guy like that doing it, then others follow suit. That's how it goes. Like, I've seen defenses here where fans would say, like, oh, all these big names on that defense. And you'd have guys who would not do that in practice, not to that level, because, well, it's practice. You got to conserve. That's fine. But you'd see that in games too. It didn't pay off in games. And I think, like, that's why, if you look at a guy like Wagner, I mean, that's why he's lasted this long, and it's why he's probably headed to the Hall of Fame. And I think you could take off probably. The other thing that Witt talked about is that Dallas, somebody asked him about all the turnovers he created. They were number one in turnovers created over the last 3 years. But what he also pointed out is they were a really good tackling team. That's going to make the difference, right? Start with that, and then become, get to the other stuff, because if you're not a good tackling team, it's fine if you make big plays, but I think it's not going to help. So anyways, that's one thing he talked about. And then Kingsbury, I talked about him. Somebody asked him, I don't know if it was Sam Fortier, somebody asked him about with Jayden Daniels, the process of making sure you're not getting drilled out there, making sure you're staying healthy, making sure you're getting down. And all Kingsbury said, basically, what's the process like? Is he going to do it? Whatever. He goes, he will. And he just kind of this little smile on his face, like, yes, it's something they have definitely harped on. The other thing he pointed out, this is where Marcus Mariota helps, because Mariota had a similar style coming out, and he can help him. You have to learn when to do it, when not to, because you don't want to take away his ability to make plays with his legs, because that's what makes him special. Like, he's a really good passer. He can be really good in that area, but what takes him to another level is the ability to scare the hell out of defenses with those legs. And the instincts he has too. And that's going to be something big too, is honing that. And I think, to be honest, it's probably going to take a couple of hit or two to get him to understand, like, oh, okay, here's where you got to get down. Here's where you can live here's where you can throw it out of bounds. Here's where you can try to extend. Third down, red zone, try to extend it, right? Some other times, don't worry about the extra 5 yards, get out of bounds, get to the next down. Anyway, the other thing Kingsbury talked about in Austin Eckler said he hasn't lost a step. I think he really likes the combination of Eckler and Brian Robinson. It's funny because people are talking about the competition. There's really not a competition with them. They're both going to play. They fill different roles. They're different backs. And Eckler gives him that quick twitch back. And I think Kingsbury's been pretty pleased with what he's seen. Again, last year the thought was, has he lost a step? But also he had the high ankle sprain. So in fairness to him, let's see what happens. But that is something that, anyways. And then on Zach Ertz, same question about Wagner. Here's a guy that's a little bit older. What has he shown? And one of the things that Kingsbury talked about is how quarterback friendly he is, and just the target he presents, and knowing where to get to make himself quarterback friendly, and how to sit in a zone, where to place yourself against certain zones, et cetera, when to drift with the quarterback, just making sure you present to the quarterback in a way where it makes it very easy for him to get the ball to you. And that's something that Ertz presents as well. So, all right, last thing, then let's get to a little bit of practice report, because one of the things I like to watch is special teams, because that often can tell you some guys at the bottom of the roster, how guys compete, et cetera. So, and I talked about this the other day, but there was some 2-on-1 stuff. And there was just basically blocking against a gunner, right? And so double teaming the gunner. And Nick Whiteside, I thought, did a nice job a couple times. There was again, 2-on-1. He was going up against Quan Martin and Benjamin St-Juste, gets around St-Juste. Got to be more physical in these areas. and just beats him down the field. Now, he did get slowed by Mike Davis and Jeremy Reeves, and they did talk to him about that. They did let him know, which is the fun part of it. I like how linebacker, undrafted guy, Ben Nickel, I think it's Nickel, how he works out there. I felt like he did a nice job getting down the field, and also just not only getting down the field, but also when he was one of the 2-versus-1s, how the angle he took to cut off the gunner. And I think that he did a nice job there. The best ball of today for Jayden Daniels, he had a deep out that I saw, Zach Ertz. Ertz makes a one-handed grab. Jeremy Reeves actually had pretty good coverage, but a nice grab by Ertz. The thing I don't know on the play is Daniels may have been sacked. And sometimes it's hard to tell. Like there was another play earlier where he kind of escapes and makes a throw. Would have been sacked on that one too. KJ Henry was part of a good stunt, and a defensive tackle got in there. I couldn't tell. I wasn't sure who it was, but I know KJ Henry was part of the stunt. Did a nice job getting in there as well. And then Daniels had a deep ball to Bryson Tremaine, and nice catch, beats Mike Davis. That's where I ended the practice report. Now let's get to your questions. So Silver Fox wants to know, haven't heard Luke McCaffrey's name mentioned much during training camp, how he's looked, and he's still tracking to be wide receiver 3. I think it'd be hard to say that he's tracking to be wide receiver 3 at this point. I think I would like to see a little bit more to get there. And I think it also depends on what packages are you using, right? So I think right now, De'Ami Brown probably been in there a little bit more. I think the other part, what helps McCaffrey is the ability to run routes from different spots. And they're going to move guys around. Like McLaurin's going to run routes from the slot as well. So right now, I would probably look at De'Ami Brown maybe a little bit more in that role right now. Now, let's see, again, practices, games where he's at, because there's some days where I think McCaffrey looks pretty good, and the other days where you say, okay, maybe you need to see a little bit more separation here or there. But still, again, he's only been the receiver for 2 years. So not an easy thing to do at all. So, I wouldn't say that he's had this great, I wouldn't say like when McLaurin was a rookie, he jumped out. Like you knew that he would it's like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to be really good. I can't say that we've seen that from McCaffrey. What I've seen are some traits. And again, McLaurin was a receiver his whole life. So, and really put a lot of work into that and had some really good receiving talent coachings at Ohio State. So with McCaffrey, I think there's a process, right? And I think there's some things you see, like I like some of the, I think he can help you in some physical ways as well. So I think there's a lot of things he can do, but as a pass catcher, it's not like he's just there early. There sometimes he jumps out and other times like, okay, still want to see a little bit more. So anyway, all right. Tom Vaccaro wants to know level of concern with the extended ambiguous Wiley tightness and curious if you've seen any growth from the depth guys like Brooks or Paul. So I don't know about like this vague tightness. I'm with you on that. They don't have to say anything about the injuries at this point. So I don't know exactly what it is, but when I talked to Wiley the other day, he said he would be fine. He still wasn't out there. Let's see what happens on Thursday. As far as Brooks and Paul goes, well, I will say too, I want to point out that I do think like they may have to bring somebody in just to fill out some line spots because there are several guys dealing with things. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. I don't know for sure, but it wouldn't be surprising at all for that reason. As far as development goes, I think that's kind of hard to say. I'm not sure. I think I want to see it in a game. I think the hard part for a guy like Paul would be can he get out in space as a guard and help you there? I think that's going to be something. I don't know that he's going to get to that point. Brooks, I don't know that you can sit there and say like, oh, he definitely warrants a roster spot. Haven't seen that. I think there are times where he looks pretty good. I think he's got to stay inside. I think he was working some at tackle yesterday and again some today. I think his best spot is at guard. And I think personally would like to see him more in there and see what he does in the game. And I'm sure that's what they're going to see as well. So I do think that's where he's best suited but how much development, kind of hard to say. I don't know. It's not like you're seeing them just like, oh my God, this kid's ready to now win a roster spot. I don't think we're at that point just yet. I think Paul, I think I'd be curious to see what he does in these games just because, there was a point where they were feeling pretty good about him, but last year, but I think they're still, I'm not sure about the quickness and the ability to move in space. So Blaine, I gave him a shout out, said he couldn't see Newton. He was at practice today, couldn't see Newton from where he was. Did he practice? The plan with him is, and Quinn said this yesterday, that, they were going to kind of basically load management. Some days where you ease up and some days where you ramp it up. And I think this was another day where you didn't ramp it up. And I don't know, I could see them being very cautious with him, but yes. So yeah, you didn't miss anything. Bob Baker, what's up, Bob? Does Tremaine make it a receiver? I don't know. I think he's got his shot, right? So I think he can help on special teams. He gives you some size. He definitely makes some plays once in a while. So does Mitchell Tinsley. Tremaine is a little bit bigger, taller, I should say. How much will that help him? So I think that is certainly something, he's got a shot, but I don't think you can say, does he make it? Because you have, let's say you go 6 guys right now. If Crowder, you have the 5 to me would be McLaurin, Dotson, McCaffrey, De'Ami Brown, and Zacchaeus. That's how I would see it right now. Let's see, ask me again in a week, right? When you get a little bit more things to go on. And then you look at, is Jamison Crowder going to be their punt returner? If he is, well, then he's your 6th receiver. Do you keep 7? And if you do, now you're looking at, what about Byron Pringle? What is he? Because I think if he makes it, he's going to have to help you as a kick returner first, right? So, because they already released him at one point. So that's what they thought him as a receiver. But now you bring him back in for a reason. But, Tinsley and Tremaine, I think, would have a chance to be that 7th receiver. Because if you get rid of Crowder, then the question is, who's the punt returner? And so whoever you release him for has to handle that role. And are you really ready to have Dotson do that full time? I don't think so. So Everett Rick says, trade. Well, I know what you're talking about. So let's talk about Ayuk real quick. So first of all, there's a little bit more appetite by San Francisco to engage in trade talks, right? To at least find out what's out there. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, they're letting Ayuk's agent talk to teams. What that does is it helps negotiate for the 49ers, because they can go out and see what teams are willing to give him what money. So right now, the teams that you look at that are really ready to engage in this are New England, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland. Those are the 3 teams most prominently mentioned. Washington is not on that prominently mentioned list. Now, did they talk to him at one point about him? Yes, because they talked to a lot of people. Adam Peters knows Brandon Ayuk very well. He knows the Niners very well. You don't think he would have talked to them about this? Of course he would, because what if they said, we'll just take, a 2nd-round pick before the draft? Okay, done. Well, that wasn't the case. So now, if you wanted to trade for him now, there's a couple of things. One, if Ayuk got traded to a team, let's say New England has the parameters for a deal, but he doesn't want to go to New England. He's not going to sign there, so they're not going to trade for him. And if the Niners don't like what they're getting back from New England, they're not going to trade him. So this is a really weird situation. So it's not as cut and dried as this is a team you want to go to, let's make a deal. Because it has to make sense for the 49ers. They are not going to give him away, period, end of sentence. They're also not going to give him away for just draft picks. So, first of all, again, Washington is very quiet on this. And I mean by quiet, I don't sense that they're really involved the way some other teams are. So the one thing I would say too is, let's say you did want to trade for him. Well, they want an impact player back. They're not trading him again, and they're not trading him for guys that you, the fan, think shouldn't be on the roster. They're not going to trade him for, you can't package, Jamin Davis and Fedarian Mathis to get Brandon Ayuk, right? They're not falling for that. All right. So let's not go there. So who's the impact player that the Niners would want from this roster to help them win a Super Bowl? Because that's all they care about, is winning a Super Bowl. Who would be that player? If I'm the Niners, the guy that I'd want, if you want to replace Ayuk, it's Terry McLaurin. Then you've got to throw in a draft pick as well, if you're Washington. And then you got to pay Ayuk $30 a year, whatever it is, because that's where it seems like the Niners aren't comfortable going to a certain number. So keep all that in mind. So again, it's very, very quiet here. I would not anticipate, certainly at this point, something happening and barring a big change. Like I gave you the teams that seem to be the most interested and the most engaged in these talks. So anyways, just to address the big question of the day, or I guess of the month, or whatever it is. Nathaniel wants to know, how does the atmosphere of this camp feel overall compared to previous camps under the previous ownership? Well, a lot better. I mean, that's for a few reasons. And it's so, I mean, there have been times, like, it's not like the teams have always been like really bad and just hated everything and all that. There were times at Richmond where you had a, good atmosphere, or teams that had good chemistry and all that. But the vibe is very different. And I think it's all because it's so new. And I've talked about this a few times, but I think for fans, you guys know this better than I, but with the new owner, I think there's more hope, because the old owner, and I never felt like he could build a sustainable winner. But would you get lucky? Well, they don't have to necessarily get lucky. You have guys now that have, I was telling someone else, Bubba Tyre, who was a longtime trainer here, if you remember him, was here during the glory days, was here up in, here through into the early 2000s. Great guy, great trainer. But I was talking to him, and I said the difference now is you have a distinct power structure, or a very clear power structure. And it's, owner, GM, football coach. Everybody knows what their role is. Everybody accepts their role. It's also a shared vision. I can't say that it's been like that ever. I think there was a chameleon vibe to the organization. Like, okay, this year it's this. All right, this didn't work. Next time it's this. That stuff doesn't fly. That's not how you build a winner. You've got to have, I remember one time for ESPN, we did a survey of all the teams, right? And just kind of like taking a look at every team from revenue to this to that. And one of the things we had to ask the franchise is, what's your motto for the franchise, right? And, what's your philosophy, your belief? And it was like, just win. Well, that's not a credo, right? Like, that's a result. You want, like, what is it that you believe in? What's the structure you believe in? What's the blueprint? I never felt there was a blueprint. I do feel like there's a blueprint now. So the vibe, and because of all that, and because of a rookie quarterback, because of a coaching change, because of a very energetic staff, and because there's a lot of new players, the vibe is very different. Now, what that means for the season, I don't know. I think they'll max out whatever that means, whether that's 7 wins, 8 wins, 9 wins. I don't know. But the vibe has been very good. When I've been around teams with good vibes, typically, and sometimes there was one year where they were 9-7, but I felt like early in the year they were, I can't remember what year it was, but it was John Jansen was here and all that. So it was back a few minutes. Maybe it was one of the Gibbs years. And I think it was like, I remember early on, they're kind of struggling. I'm like, this team worked too hard and has too good a vibe around it to be like this. And then they went on a run, and they won. I can't remember. I don't remember but they had a really good finish to make the playoffs, and they were playing really well going into the playoffs. That, you sometimes you get those vibes, but I don't know what it's going to mean for this group, because I think there's so many questions about, like, when will Daniels, when will he make it? I mean, when will he become that kind of guy? Will the O-line be good enough? Will the corners be good enough? So, I think that's where I'd be at with that. And so Red wants to know, Percy Butler has been the third safety, but Forrest is second on the depth chart. What do you make of that? Butler's been the third safety. That's what I make of that. So again, this is not the coaches pouring over this stuff. This is, for the most part, some of the key spots, yes, they're going to have a say in that. But for the most part, the PR staff is putting this together. But I would say Butler has, by and large, been the third safety. That's what I make of that. So, and I would say that's going to come down to how they look in games. So then let's see, we got Marco says, I saw Sinnott as a third string tight end, expecting to be second. Is this based on Bates having a great camp or Sinnott failing to impress? No, I think, listen, Bates is a veteran. Like, he's going to look good in camp. He's a really good blocking tight end. It's not, they're going to use Ben Sinnott. They're going to pair him with Zach Ertz in packages because he can move around. So he's getting a lot of runs. So again, I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock into all this just yet. Some spots when the guy's starting, yes. But like, is it him being behind two veterans? Is that a failing to impress? No. I think they really like John Bates and they really like Zach Ertz. So who's he going to be ahead of? Now, I will say, as a pass catcher, he's going to be ahead of John Bates, but he also, I would say, Sinnott has to. I don't think he's necessarily jumped out in that area. I think he's jumped out for his physical play from multiple spots, and he will play. So I wouldn't worry about that too much at all, because I wouldn't read too much into that. D Brown wants to know, do you think we can make the playoffs? How good does Coleman look? Playoffs, let's see. I mean, there's way too many things to look at with that, without just based on the early rounds of camp. I've learned long ago not to overstate what you see or extrapolate too much from what you see, right? So when I look at this, I'm still looking at how are they building for the future as well. And can they make the playoffs? I mean, the NFC, I think a lot of teams will be in that area, that 7-win to 10-win area. And if you get good health, if Jayden Daniels does really well, if the corners play well, then you can make it. But I think we've got to see. I want to see how the corners fare against other offenses. I want to see how Daniels continues to progress, how the O-line progresses, because that's a huge key as well. So I think there's still too many questions to say, can they? I mean, I think in this league, yes, anybody can. I would not put it past anybody. But at this point, I'm not sitting there saying oh yeah, I think they're definitely a playoff team. I would say I like the start they've had. Now let's see them against other teams. So, and as far as Coleman, I've talked about that. I think Coleman's looked pretty good. And I think I like, again, the Jets are the next step. Each step, I feel like he's looked good. I like his quickness. I like how he uses his hands. And I think he does a pretty good job staying square. So, but now we've got to see him against other pass rushers and sometimes much better pass rushers than what he's going to face in practice. So let's see, a couple more here. Which position group would you say would be the most interesting to watch for roster spots in this upcoming game? I think for roster spots, it's the next couple of games. I don't know that one game isn't going to determine that. But if you're looking for that, back end of the receiver, right? Back end of, the safety position. Somebody brought up Percy Butler, Derek Forrest. I think that position is going to be one worth watching for competition, because there's some guys what do they do with, Dominique Hampton? I would think he would make it. You have Jeremy Reeves there. You have Tyler Owens, I think, is a guy that you could probably put on practice squad and be okay, but I do like him. So I think the back end of corner, the back end of receiver, I think there's some O-line battles, but I think that's, we'll see. I would like to see how Jamin Davis looks against another team. And I think the other ones are, there you go. Is Forbes going to, Small Fish wants to know, is Forbes going to start? Is he more of a special teams guy? He is not a special teams guy. That's part of the problem. If Forbes isn't starting, where does he help you? Now he can return punts. Or they've worked him at punter. Now he has, he's listed. He's not one of the top two there, but he has worked as a punt return in practice. He's not going to help you otherwise on special teams. And he's also worked on kick returns. Is he going to start? Well, he's been, and I know the depth chart has him right now number 2 behind Davis, but in practice, he's been consistently going in there with the starter. So that's what I know there. So I go by that more than I go by the depth chart. Because that's where, because again, the depth charts are very, very unofficial. And they, while it garners a lot of discussion, I don't think that it's, again, let's not overreact to all of it. But I think the key was that Daniels is going to start. So let's see. SJ Magic, like the Lions a couple years ago when they started 0-8, but every game was a fight. It looked like they could win. That's what I want, a team who fights and doesn't quit by halftime. Yeah, I think that's what everybody wants, but you want some W's too. I think they're better off than where the Lions were at that year, but I do think, like that team, what you want is lay the foundation and establish who you are, the identity, not just of your offense, your defense, as a program, as a team. That's one of the things they said they wanted to do, and I think that's the intent this year. So yes, I think that's a good way to look at it, is that, establish who you are as a program. So if they do that, and I think they'll be better than 0-8. If they're 0-8, I think there's some problems. If they're 0-8, it's going to be an interesting trade deadline. I'll tell you that. But I do think you're right. Like, what you want to see is a more competitive version. And it's funny because in the first couple of years, even under Rivera, I felt like they were getting there. I just felt like last year they plateaued in 2022, and they tanked. They bottomed out a year ago, and by halftime, as we saw in some of those games, it was bad. Now, some of those games they started to come back. It was the Bears. I mean, but still, it was not good. And I would be surprised if that kind of stuff happened this year. So last one here, folks. I appreciate you guys tuning in. And I just as a reminder, I will be back on Wednesday. I'm going to be talking to Nikki Javala later today just to get some of her camp impressions and go over some guys, lay the groundwork for the joint practice and then looking ahead a little bit to the game. But Nikki will be on here Wednesday, and then I'll be back after the joint practice Thursday. We'll have another one Friday, after the game Saturday, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so is it Niffer? Who's going to be our starting secondary, do you think? Who do I think? So right now, based on practice, it would be Quan Martin and Jeremy Chin would be the safeties. If they went to a 3-safety set initially, then it would be Percy Butler. That would be the guy. That's how they've looked so far. And the 3 corners out there would be Forbes, Samerstill, and St. Juste. Now, again, they did have Forbes behind Mike Davis on the depth chart, but again, Forbes has been going out there. So right now, but that's where it stands right now. How it goes in a couple weeks. Let's watch what happens this week, next week, and the week after, and then ask me again. So anyway, folks, that's all I got for you today. I appreciate you tuning in. Appreciate all the questions and the comments. Always enjoy this. I'll be doing more of these, periodically. So, and I appreciate you taking time out during the day. I hope you're not getting in trouble at work, and I will talk to you next.
Sometimes it feels like the world is moving at hyperspeed and you can't keep up because it's one thing then another. And don't forget the meeting and the yoga class and the dinner reservation. But then you get into the all-new Nissan Murano and you feel the breeze from the panoramic moonroof while the massaging seats melt away the tension of the day. And you realize that sometimes the greatest rush is not rushing at all. Shop the all-new Murano at nissanusa.com. Panoramic moonroof massaging leather appointed seats are available features.